So we've been 4 or 5 weeks now in this series, The Functional Family, and for the last 4 weeks we've been talking about how to knock the dis out of your family's functionality, and we've talked about a lot of things. If you were with us last week, you know that we talked about how to make peace, and how we all have people in our family who we feel alienated from or isolated from. Maybe we've lost contact with them, and we saw last week that if you or I, we are followers of Christ, that we are commanded to be ministers of reconciliation. And so, that we need to be the ones to reach out in spite of someone's sin, not because of their sin. And at the end of our service, if you were here, dozens of people stood up saying, you know what, I can think of somebody that I need to reconcile with, and I'm going to do that this week. And I just want you to know I've been praying for you this week, that has happened, and that reconciliation is already, maybe the card is in the mail, maybe the email has been sent, and you haven't heard anything back. Maybe you wrote the note and you haven't been able to send it yet, but I just pray that the wheels of reconciliation are in motion for you and the people in your family. Today we turn to the topic of being single. You may wonder, what does being single have, what place does that have in a series on the functional family? And there are lots of reasons why we would cover the topic of singleness in a series on family, but first and foremost, some would say most families today are led by single adults. And so this is a very relevant topic. Unmarried adults are the fastest growing segment of our population and have been for over 30 years. Over 40% of adults in America are unmarried, single. And trends are showing that if trends continue, that very soon unmarried adults will outnumber married adults for the first time in recorded history. So unmarried people are a huge part of our society. Now, a lot of people would say, though, that unmarried people are not a huge part of Newday. I'll hear this often. Newday is a church that's just all about families and just targets families, and singles are kind of a significant minority. And I can understand that. I get that, because if you just look around and you see all the kids, and you're like, wow. I mean, it's just like this must be all just about families. But did you know that I did a little research this week to figure out what percentage of people at Newday or what percentage of households at Newday are led by single adults? You want to take a guess on what that percentage would be? I heard 30. I heard what? 42. 42% of households at Newday are led by single adults. Anybody else? I did like a poll this week, and people were like 10, 15, 18. You guys are a little high. But actually, the number at Newday is over one-third. Over one-third of all households are led by single adults. And so singles are a large part of who we are as a church. And so we need to talk about this. And today I'm going to use this term, single. And it's a term that I don't like a whole lot. It's a term that I'm not particularly fond of. It communicates kind of the idea of being alone or isolated, and I know most of the singles I know are anything but alone or isolated, but they're very well integrated and they're well connected with others. But I use the term today only to describe a marital status. Okay, so when I say single today, I'm not saying alone, isolated, I'm saying unmarried. And I want to acknowledge that single is not an emotionally neutral term. That to be single, or to be called single, or to identify oneself as single describes different situations and different stories for different people, and therefore those different stories and different situations lead to different emotions. For instance, there are 3 major ways that we come by singleness. And the first category of singles would be those who are never married. And this would be the largest category of singles in the United States. About 60% of all singles would be those who never married. The second category would be those who are divorced. And that's about a quarter of all singles. People are single who were once married and no longer are. And then finally we have the category of those who are widowed. And that's about 15% of all singles in the U.S. And you can just see right there's a huge diversity. You can't just say single and it's all one person, but there's huge diversity, but there's also diversity of circumstances and stories that led to singleness, which would then lead to different emotions. For instance, some singles are grieving greatly their singleness, not only because they're learning to live on their own, but because they've lost someone that they love. to death. Some have great shame or guilt when they think about their singleness because it maybe has come out of what they believe to be personal failure. And although we know that we're forgiven, we still carry around this sense of shame that our marriage failed. And so when I use the word single, all these emotions come up. Or for many of us, there's a great sense of glee when we think of being single because we love being single and all the freedom that it brings. And I talked to some of you this week that are like, yeah, hey, I love it. It's great. That's the emotion that comes up. But for others, it's like grieving the fact that I don't have a lifelong partner yet. And why don't I? And that creates all kinds of different emotions. And the point is, this is not an emotionally neutral topic that I'm going to be speaking into today. I'm well aware of that. And I know I lack one major thing this morning as I talk about this topic, and that's credibility, right? Because I haven't been single in almost 22 years. And so I acknowledge that too. I don't have a lot of credibility. You may wonder, what in the world can I say that would be relevant, that would have any credibility? But I'll just give you this. First of all, I'm going to be sharing the Bible's perspective on some single issues. And the passage I'll be using was written by a single guy. Okay, so hopefully that gives me a little bit of credibility. But second of all, I spent time this week being reverse mentored. And that is, I became a learner and I sat at the feet of many of the singles at Newday. What I did was I sent out an essay survey with about 8 questions on it to 10 Newday singles in all different life stages, and just to kind of get what they're going through and so that they can inform this message as well. And so for those of you who took part in that survey and shared your hearts and your experiences, and in some cases shared your pain, I just want to say thank you. I humbly come before you today knowing that what I'm discussing today is very real for many of you, and that there are some very raw emotions, and there's some pain. And so I'm going to tread softly today. And really, I realized this week in talking to some folks that really I'm standing here in a no-win situation. Because I realize that unless, for some of you, unless I am able to end this sermon promising you a spouse in like the next 6 months, really, that everything's going to fall short. And I feel that. And I want to promise you a spouse in the next 6 months. I don't know that I can do that in this sermon. But I am going to offer you the 2 greatest assets that Newday has and lay it at your disposal and say, I hope that this brings some answers and some comfort. Okay? All right. Let me just start by telling you what I'm going to tell you. All right? I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then you could, like, if you have to leave early or you just want to know whether you want to listen for the rest of the time, you'll be able to determine. But this is what I want to tell you, and then we'll kind of unpack this as we go. That to be married or to be single, both are equal options in God's plan. To be married or to be single are both equal options in God's sight. And to be married or to be single are both equal and interdependent parts of God's family. Okay? So whether you are here today single, whether widowed, divorced, or never married, or you are here and you are married, whether happily or unhappily, wherever you find yourself, all of us are in a place that is an equal standing in God's eyes. He could use us all equally. He views us all equally, and we are all equal and interdependent parts of God's family. Now, let me tell you what I'm not saying. Because I know some of you are going to leave here today thinking I said something that I didn't say. I am not saying that all single people are called to be single. All right? Some single people are called to be single. They just have this calling on my life. You know what? I have a calling to celibacy. I have a calling to live my life independently. I love the freedom. I love the freedom it gives me to serve God and to do what I want to do and go on this trip when I want to go. Some people are called to singleness. Most, I believe, are probably not called to singleness. But whether you find yourself single or married right now, you can be right in the center of God's will because both can be a part of God's plan for your life. And more than that, if you are single or married, you have equal standing with God and you have an equal position in the family of God. Which means that the church is not to cater to families or to married people or to single people. Both are equal and interdependent parts of God's family. Now, I feel silly just having to even say that. Because if I were to tell you those things and ask you whether you agree with those things, most of us intellectually will say, well, yeah, duh, of course. God could use someone who's single. God could use someone who's married. They're both equal in God's sight, that we're all equal and interdependent parts of God's family. Yeah, of course. Check that box. I believe that. I know that. But while we may say we believe these things, if we check our attitudes and our actions and our words, oftentimes we will say and do things that would demonstrate we believe something differently. As we'll see, many single people have the perception that the Christian church, not just Newday, but that the Christian church is much more interested in married people than in single people. That until they are married, the church doesn't value them. And many married people treat single people like they have a condition to be cured. Right? And if we're honest with ourselves, all of us can check our memories and remember times when we said things that maybe we didn't realize were insensitive, but we say things to singles like, hey, are you seeing anybody yet? Like, your life is on hold until you get into a relationship. Or, I'm sure you'll meet someone soon, don't worry. Or, how can a handsome guy like you still be single? I.e., what's wrong with you? See? And what this communicates when we say things like this is, you're not whole yet. You have a condition that needs to be cured. And our culture just reinforces this. Our culture is very much couple-based. And many singles, as a result, feel like their lives are kind of on hold until they can get into a long-term relationship or be married. So, the point is that both married and singles are equal options in God's sight, and that both are equal and interdependent parts of God's family. Open your Bibles, if you have them, to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Again, 1st and 2 Corinthians are the two ancient manuscripts letters written by the Apostle Paul to new believers in the city of Corinth, a very metropolitan area that dealt with a lot of the same issues and had the same questions that we have today in our lives. And chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians is a kind of a landmark chapter. It's all about marriage and divorce and remarriage and singleness and all of these things. And in verse 26 of 1 Corinthians 7, Paul launches into the discussion that's going to give us our point today. All right, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 26. Paul starts here. He says, because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for you to remain as you are. He's talking about marital status here. And he's talking about a present crisis. Don't know exactly what that was, whether it was something that was difficult happening in the Christian church at the time, or it was a time that was about to come on the Christian church. But things were about to get very difficult for the believers in Corinth, and as a result, circumstances were dictating maybe how people should consider their marital status. And so Paul says, I think it's good for you to remain as you are. He goes on and he says, are you married? Do not seek a divorce. Are you unmarried? Do not look for a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. And so what Paul is saying here is, I'm giving you some advice on marriage, but really this is not a moral issue. If you choose to marry, that's great. If you choose to be single, that's great too. Both are completely excellent options for anyone to consider as they move forward in their life, being single or being married. God could use either one. He goes on to say, but those who marry will face many troubles in this life, and I want to spare you this. Apparently, Paul knew some married couples, right? He's like, let me just warn you, though, because right now you've got this rosy picture of marriage, but I want to spare you some trouble. Not just because of the circumstances, the present trouble that we're in, but because marriage does complicate life, right? There are beautiful parts of marriage, but Paul is saying there are also many troubles in this life. I want to spare you this. So the first thing we see here is that time of trouble or perplexity on the Christian church was apparently there or coming, and whether you get married or don't get married, it's not a moral issue, but he's kind of leaning toward there being a better alternative of being single. He goes on in verse 32. I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he could please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he could please his wife. And his interests are divided. So Paul, a single man, is making a case. He's saying, hey, I'm single, and I'm serving God with all my heart. And you know what? I don't think this is a bad option. God is using me in this particular role. And my interests are not divided between a wife. I don't have to go home and see the kids. I'm able to give more of my attention and my interests to God. They're undivided. He goes on and says the same thing for a woman. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. Once again, same for a woman, you know. If I'm single, I'm completely freed up. I can devote more of my time to serving the world and pursuing my passions and service and the kingdom of God. But if I'm married, my interests are divided. He goes on. He says, I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you. Don't feel restricted by this. Don't feel like I'm telling you to do something you don't want to do. Just breathe, okay? I'm not saying you have to be single. I'm just saying this is an alternative that is worthy of consideration. We don't have to rush right to this one thing of marriage. He says, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. And so Paul is saying, you know what, get married if you want to get married. If you don't want to get married, don't get married. But in some circumstances, it could actually even be beneficial to be single. He goes on, verse 36. If anyone thinks he is acting improperly toward the virgin he is engaged to, and if she is getting along in years, and he feels he ought to marry, he should do as he wants. In other words, you know, sometimes it's the right thing for you to do to marry. Maybe you're leading someone on. Maybe they're waiting for you, and they've been holding out and saying no to other people and whatever. He's saying, you know what? Act appropriately. Do the right thing. And there are times to do the right thing is to say, to make that proposal. And he goes on and he says, he is not sinning. They should get married, all right? Again, this is not a moral issue. He goes on to say, but the man who has settled the matter in his own mind, who is under no compulsion, but has control over his own will, and who has made up his mind not to marry the virgin, this man also does the right thing. Again, options. Whether you are single or whether you are married, both are viable options in God's will. It's your choice. He goes on to say, so then, he who marries the virgin does right, but he who does not marry her does even better. Wow, great summary. So, to summarize kind of what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 is, one, to be married or single are both equal options. You know, this, that, okay, whatever. It's okay. God can use it all. And number two, there are some circumstances that make being single advantageous to marriage, whether it's circumstances in our culture, circumstances in our lives. Sometimes being single can be a better choice. So, this was the way that the Christian church viewed marriage and singleness for the first 1,500 years of Christianity. You know, our church fathers, the apostles, down through the ages, always said marriage is a good thing, marriage is sacred, it's blessed by God. But for those who choose a life of celibacy and singleness, that was like a higher road of spirituality. And that was a common view for hundreds of years, that those who are single are the most spiritual. But then along came the Reformation, and a guy by the name of Martin Luther came along. And he was someone who had said, you know what, I'm going to be celibate for the Lord, and I'm going to not have divided interests. And he, along with the other priests, never took a wife. But then he rebelled against those traditions and the church, in which we're all thankful for. But then he took a wife. And all of a sudden, marriage took this giant leap forward in our perceptions. And so began the change in thinking in the Protestant church. And since then, marriage has received this elevated status, while singleness is viewed as something that happens to us while we're waiting to get married. And we've come to the place where we have elevated the status of marriage so much that we believe that marriage is God's only plan for everyone. But this isn't the way things always were. Unless you think that this is just an idea that we're getting out of 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Let me share with you a few more ideas from the New Testament. Did it ever occur to you that Jesus, the Savior of the world, was single by choice? And you're like, well, yeah, but he had to save the world, and, he couldn't sin. Well, if he really wanted to face temptation, he should have got married, right? I mean, he could have saved the world and got married. But and what he did was incredibly counterculture. There is no Hebrew word for bachelor. I mean, it's not even in their vocabulary. Jewish men were required to get married and have families. Many taught that if a man wasn't married by the time he was 20, he was cursed. Sound familiar? And I can just imagine all of the well-meaning friends of Jesus and Jesus' mother and Jesus' mother's friends all hinting around to Jesus that there are plenty of good Jewish women in Galilee, and why didn't he settle down? Hasn't he found anybody yet? Oh, my single friends, take courage. Jesus has walked in your shoes. And he put up with all the mindless comments and the matchmaking attempts and all the social pressure. But he chose to remain single. And I hope you find the perfect match for you. I really do, if that's what you want. But I also hope you see from the life of Jesus that God can use you whether you're married or you're single. God saved humanity, the entire human race, through the life and death of a single adult, right? So clearly, being single can be a part of God's useful plan for your life. Second, singleness on earth is an acceptable status, I believe, because according to the teachings of Jesus, it's going to be our marital status through eternity. Hushed silence. Remember that thing that Jesus said about, they asked him about marriage in heaven, and he's everything. You don't even understand the scriptures. He goes, in heaven, we're going to be like the angels. There's not going to be any marriage in heaven. And a lot of us get really nervous about that, particularly the single people get nervous because they're like, what? I better get at it now then because I'm going to be all eternity without a spouse. And the married people get nervous about that. And I understand that because I like my wife a lot. And the idea of moving into the friend zone with her for eternity is kind of, scary. But it's only because we don't get what is waiting for us in heaven. That when we get to heaven, there's going to be such a depth of intimacy and love between one another and a knowing of one another with everybody that marriage in comparison is going to seem shabby, right? There's going to be such depth of relationship. But the fact is we're going to be single, and so it's the married people who are going to have to adjust when we get to heaven. And so singleness, how can that be wrong in someone's life today if that's going to be our status through all eternity? And finally, and here's really the point I want to get at, singleness can be a workable option because Christ provided a family and relationships for all of us that go so much deeper than blood relationships. According to the Bible, according to Jesus, while marriage is sacred and the nuclear family is the most important, the nuclear family is very important, it is not the most important institution in our culture or in our world. It's not. And you may disagree with that. That may rile you up. It may make you angry. But the family is not the center of God's kingdom. It's not the center of God's plan. But the clear teaching of Jesus displaced and decentralized the family as the central element of society. In the Old Testament, it was the family. In the New Testament, it's something completely different. And perhaps you remember the story when Jesus' biological family comes to see him. His mother and brothers are outside, and he's teaching, and there's a huge crowd, and they can't get at him. And someone comes to him and says, hey, your mother and your brothers are outside waiting for you. And Jesus kind of tongue-in-cheek, somewhat disrespectfully, it seems, says something that kind of we pass over, but this is foundation-rocking stuff that he says, where he says to them, who is my mother and who are my brothers? Not the people standing outside, but those in this room who do the will of my Father in heaven. So Jesus is saying that allegiance to my Father, allegiance to the kingdom of God, precedes allegiance to family. He says, my mother and my brothers, those aren't my true family. You are my family. And he makes it clear that his kingdom threatens everything, including our family relationships, when he said on countless occasions things like, anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves a son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And again, we read over those things and we're like, what? You know, he's talking symbolically. It's really nice. It's fluffy. It just means he wants us to love him more. No, 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 no. It's saying that the kingdom of God threatens every relationship in our lives, including blood relationships. And that the number one relationship that we have is our relationship to him. And if you are aligned with him, then you are my brother. If you are under his authority, you are my sister. And we have a connection that goes so much deeper than the fact that we were born in the same biological family. Now, if we have both, that's great too. If we're biological family and we're all aligned to God, but if I'm aligned to God and you're not, then I have family that is even tighter than blood. So Jesus affirms the importance of family and family relationships. And I'm just scratching the surface on this. Again, if you guys want to have a discussion on this, I'd love to. This is a teaching that goes so deep, starts in the Old Testament, goes all the way through the New Testament. It's central. But in our culture, we don't see it because of the way we have elevated family so high. But the church and these relationships are to go deeper. And again, Jesus illustrates this so beautifully when he's dying on the cross and he knows that someone needs to take care of his mother. And who does he call out? He's got brothers. You know, he's got biological brothers. He can say, Mom, go back to James. You know, he'll take care of you. But what does he do? He points to his kingdom brother, John. He says, would you take care of my mother? You know, because you're my brother, John, and we're family. The church is to be a picture to the world of God's love. Now, what this means is that if the church is the center of God's work on earth, and if it's this new family of God, then singles really shouldn't be alone or isolated. That if you're single, that you would have a place to belong in the family of God while you wait God's destiny for your life, whether that be a husband or a wife, again, which is what I hope for all of us, if that's what we want. But as we wait, there's no reason to wait alone. That we have a family to be with, a place to grow, a place to make a kingdom contribution and form lasting relationships and to be a part of a family. But only if the church is doing its job. But so often, we as the church have not done our job. Oftentimes we are less than functional. Now, as I consider Newday, and as I have talked with singles this week about their experiences at Newday, I think that we have so much to celebrate here. That this is a church that has a very healthy and safe culture. For the most part, we're not perfect, and please, singles, give us grace because we do fail. But I don't hear the matchmaking statements being made. I'm not hearing the awkward things of happening, like, why haven't you found anybody yet? I mean, I think we're past a lot of that, to which I would say, yay. I think we have great opportunities for singles to plug into small groups and service opportunities and outreach projects and mission trips and whatnot. I've seen families integrate unmarried folks into their activities and lives on a regular basis. So yeah, there are so much good that is going on, but also there are areas that we can grow. And so just listen to the perspective of a few of our singles. Being at Newday does not make it easy to be single. The reason I say this is because there are so many married couples, it can feel lonely at times. The foot washing during communion can be awkward because I get turned down a lot when I ask to wash someone's feet because they're doing it with their spouse. Singles are left out of a lot of things because Newday is a family-oriented church. So as I read some of those comments, I have to say, some of them sting. But perception is reality. And so what do? How do we become more functional as God's family? Well, I asked our singles for some suggestions about what we could do better. And one person wrote, what can Newday do better to serve singles? Find more of them, preferably between 25 and 31 and good looking. Wow. Okay, well, listen. If we do the things we're about to suggest, I think the secondary kind of result might be exactly what you want. Newday would become that kind of church that single people would flock to because we would be offering the very things singles need as they continue to navigate life as a single. And the most important thing we are called to do is just this one thing, church: cross-status integration. Cross-status integration, that single people and married people are doing life together. I think the church has made a huge mistake over the last 30, 40 years as the single population has risen with the whole idea of singles ministry. And the idea is that we put all the singles all together in one room and we try to deal with singles all on their own. I think it's been a failure. It hasn't worked. As a matter of fact, the singles I communicated with this week, I asked them, if you could be in a small group integrated with married people or a single group of just singles, which would you prefer? And an overwhelming majority said, I want to be with other married people. I want to be with other people who are married or single. One single person writes this: I don't want to be a part of a singles ministry because the majority of my needs have nothing to do with the fact that I'm single. I need prayer. I need to serve others. I need to be held accountable for my sins. And I figure married people need those things too. I don't want to be segregated with people who superficially are just like me. And so what I think singles and married people and the church needs more than anything is cross-status integration. Married people, single people, old people, young people, educated, uneducated, different ethnicities, everybody doing life together in an integrated fashion. Now, I asked some of our singles, when are the times at Newday when you felt most a part of the family, that you really felt the most integrated? Listen to some of these quotes. One person says, lunch invitations. There you go. I was invited to a family's home for lunch several years ago, and they have not stopped inviting me since. I go to their house nearly every Saturday. Someone else says, it was in my small group. It was 5 couples and me. It didn't matter that I was single. Another person says, the small groups concept at Newday is the first time I have felt part of a family. Someone else says, it's just mundane, everyday things that mean the most, like, hey, want to go and do so-and-so, or go to so-and-so's game, or can you help me do such and such? Just having a relationship. Someone else says, when I served and my team just made people feel welcome, just like my church family made me feel welcome. So a serving team. So this is the one thing, I think, that the church has to offer singles, and it's to be a part of the most important family on the planet. That it's not good to do life alone. And so we can offer a place of belonging. And so what does that look like? Besides the examples we've already presented. Well, it looks like this, just as simple as, hey, are you alone today? Come and sit with me. Or why don't you come with us? Or why don't you come to lunch with us? We'd love to have you. Or inviting people, regardless of marital status, into your small group or your grow group. Or whenever you see a new person at church, regardless of their marital status, that you would make the effort to help bridge them into this family. That regardless, again, of their marital status, invite them, sit with them, introduce them around, show them around. I mean, a church that is committed to this kind of inclusivity will have no problem making single people feel welcome. It doesn't matter how many kids we have or how many married couples there are. Now, before we think that all of the dysfunction in the family is due simply to the married people, we need to think again, because singles also need to carry a part of the responsibility, right? Singles for too long, and I'm stereotyping, but singles for too long have remained disengaged from the church. Now, again, I'm not talking about all singles, because I know we have many, many singles at all life stages here at Newday who are fully committed, fully engaged, serving in groups, attending regularly. I mean, if there's an event, there they are, right? But we all also probably know some singles who kind of float from church to church or this event to that event, never really committing anywhere, just kind of going here, going there. Research and experience show that singles are less likely to serve at church, less likely to attend regularly, and less likely to participate in small groups, the very 3 things that singles need most to be able to plug in to community: serve, attend worship regularly, and plug into a small group. And so when I hear singles, as I have over the years, come to me and say, it is so hard to plug into Newday because it's so family-oriented, yet I only see them at church once every 6 or 7 weeks, and you're not in a small group, and you're not on a service team, we have to just speak the truth here and say, it's not just Newday, okay? But you need to be willing to plug in. And so one of the unique challenges of every single person is just this: fully engage. Fully engage. Use your singleness to God's advantage. Right? Plug in. Get involved in your passion. And I'm not just talking about the church. Get involved in your passion areas in the community. Go on mission trips. Be a big brother. Be a big sister. Invest in kids. Volunteer at the school. Get involved in the community. But yes, also get involved in your church. Get on a service team. Plug into a small group. Attend regularly. Invite people to your house. Don't hold any of your heart or energy back, but open yourself to the people around you. Trust the people around you. And when they make mistakes, forgive them and show grace. And as you think about it, for those who are singles and want to be married, this is exactly what you would want in a future spouse. You want someone who's going to be fully engaged. You're going to want someone who's heart wide open to God and to the people around them. You're going to want someone who's fully committed to Christ. And if that is what you're looking for in a spouse, then it's only fair that we live those kind of lives as well, as we're waiting for God to bring our lives into intersection with theirs. Which leads to the next point. No message on being single would be complete without me asking you to stay out of bed. And why do we need to talk about this? You're like, whoa, that's out of left field. We're just talking about community and all this stuff. Now we're talking about staying out of bed. If you're single or you've ever been single, which is everybody in the room, you know that this is the hardest part about being single. Is maintaining sexual purity and a commitment to live a life of celibacy. That is, in this culture, one of the most difficult things of anyone to attempt to do. It is hard. And we may say, you know what, in the Bible they wrote about these things, and maybe they were able to do it back then, but they don't understand our culture. But listen, this isn't new, this cultural thing. As a matter of fact, in the first century, as Jesus and the apostles were talking about sexual purity, they lived in a culture that was much more highly promiscuous in sex than ours is. I mean, it was everywhere. It was not only a part of the everyday life, it was a part of worship in the pagan temples. You could walk down the street and get it anywhere, all of the time. You see it everywhere. It was happening everywhere. And it's into this culture of high promiscuity that Paul would write to young men, treat older women as your mother, and younger women as your sister. It's into this culture that the Council of Jerusalem would tell new believers to abstain from sexual immorality. And this is still one of the hardest commands to keep today. And I know it takes resolve, it takes a willingness to be ridiculed and misunderstood by people in this world, because they're going to be like, what? You're celibate? What? You're a virgin? What? It takes high relational boundaries. I'm not going into that situation with him or her. It takes accountability. Hey, would you ask me the hard questions? Would you ask me if I went there or with him or her? And which is a great reason why singles need to be fully engaged in the church, because that's where you're going to find people who are wanting to hold you accountable and wanting to cheer for you and wanting to ask you those hard questions and are wanting to live in the same way that you do. And although it's difficult, I would say staying out of bed is worth it. Not only does it keep us pure before God and our conscience is clear, not only does it keep us free from such incredible heartache that is unnecessary, but again, isn't this what you expect from your future spouse? I mean, if you're single, are you looking for someone super experienced? Or are you looking for someone who's stayed pure before God? And although it was hard, they surrounded themselves with accountability and with people who would walk with them and hold them accountable and encourage them and would be able to say to you, hey, you know what? I have a gift for you. Isn't that what you would want? And so to do anything less is what we call hypocrisy, where you expect someone else to do something and you're not willing to do it yourself. And I understand that in this room, there has been failure. I understand that we fall short and we make mistakes. And that's where we take all this to Jesus. we take the difficulty to Jesus, because that's something he gets. Jesus lived 30-some years as a single guy. He understands sexual temptation. He understands the thoughts. He understands the feelings and the hormones. He was tempted in every way as we are. And so you could take the difficulty to him. On the tough days, you could take it to him and say, help me. I'm about to break. And where there has been failure, and where there are feelings of guilt and shame because of continual failure, we take that to Jesus, because that's what he died to pay for. And you take it to Jesus and you say, Lord, I feel less than worthy. I feel less than a person. I feel like I have no control over my body. I feel like I've let you down again. I said I wouldn't do it, but there I go. And we take it to him and we say, make me whole again. Wash me clean. Give me strength. Surround me with people who will hold me up and will ask me the hard questions and will get in my face if need be. But make this commitment to stand strong and stay out of bed. Finally, whatever your marital status, it's just this: be content. Accept your status as a gift, even though you don't want the status maybe for the rest of your life, and you're planning to be married. You don't want to be single the rest of your life. Be content just today. And I know there are many who are hurting and confused in our congregation because you want to be in a relationship now. One single wrote of marriage and having children, and they said this: I want this. When will it be my turn? And I got to tell you, as your pastor, that breaks my heart to know that there are people in our congregation who feel that. And I wish I could snap my fingers and take care of that. And I'll tell you what, over the years, I love you guys so much. I have actually contemplated getting all the single people who want to be married in a room and saying, all right, you stand over there by him, and you go over there by her, and just performing a mass wedding and saying, go, be fruitful and multiply, I have contemplated that. But we all know it's not that simple, right? Some don't want to be married. Others aren't married because of circumstances, because of choices, because of timing, right? There are different reasons of why we are all single right now. And so for now, for today, I'm asking, can we all be content? Because the truth is, we have a lot of discontent people in this room. Married people who are discontent, and single people who are discontent. We have married people who are wishing they were single, and we have some single people who are wishing they were married, right? The grass is always greener, as they say. But we are called to be content in whatever our circumstances are. So one Newday single puts it like this. I love this. I'm not single because I have chosen to be. I would love to be married or even in a long-term relationship, but that's not in God's plan for me right now. I have two choices. I could either be unhappy and miserable, or I could live my life to the fullest, staying confident in God's game plan for my life. While I may not understand his timing, he knows the right person and the right time for me, and until then, I choose to make the best of it so that when the time is right, I'll have no regrets. Love that. Engage fully, stay out of bed, be content. And I know, I probably raised more questions today than I have answered questions today. I hope that today can start a conversation. If you'd like to go one-on-one, I would love to hear your heart. Maybe, did you misunderstand something? Did I say something that maybe didn't sit right with you? Or we could take this conversation to our Newday Network Facebook page. But more than just starting a conversation, I hope we could see just a continual cultural turn at Newday. The tide continue to grow and swell as we become that place of cross-status integration. That Newday would be living out the values of Jesus in our relationships with one another. And that we wouldn't just hang out with people just like us, because that's what the world does. But that we would be spending life with and investing in people who are very different from us, age-wise, ethnically, marital status. That there be cross-status integration. That is what will show the world that Jesus is real. And that is what brings us the most deep connection and intimacy and healing that we all need to experience. Everybody needs a family. And this is God's greatest family on earth. question is, will we live that way? And so if you're married, I'm asking you, if you're not already intentionally living this way, would you? Not just intend to, but would you this week? And I know you're thinking, well, they're going to think I'm doing it because, Pastor Dave mentioned it. Well, okay, that's great. It's a good place to start. And, and singles, you got to do this too. It can't be one way. You've got to start inviting married people into your circles as well. But we begin to cross-integrate, or continue, not begin, because we're already doing so well with this. We would continue to cross-integrate and be the family God called us to be. Let's pray.